Greetings, greetings, all. I am so excited to be here and finally to be speaking about the eclipse. A few days ago, or maybe it's been almost a week now, I shared a post that wasn't mine about the excitement of seeing a total lunar eclipse. And in my area, in the northeast of Ohio, up by Lake Erie, we are going to be in the path of totality. And that is a first in the lifetime for me. So I was really interested and excited about this eclipse, not just because of the path of totality, but because um, it feels like a monumental eclipse. This eclipse has so many different things going on with it. It's conjunct Chiron to the minute, which is pretty exciting. We're going to have a Mars Saturn conjunction, and then also a Jupiter Uranus conjunction is happening at the same time as the eclipse. And there's lots of other transits as well. And the fact that it, like the Great American Eclipse of 2017, is going to make its way through America, meaning that um, it is a massive shifting point or turning point for people in America. And we all know, at least the people in America, the people who have their like finger on the pulse, the people who are paying attention to the collective, that 2017 was a hugely pivotal year for us. Like things really started to shift at that point. They really started to accelerate. And so the fact that we're having another eclipse so soon after 2017, another one that has the path of totality, like through, skating through the middle of America seems very monumental. So why did this video, why I want to explain why I really needed to sit with what I wanted to say here ahead of time. So for years and years and years, if you follow my work, you'll know that prior to every eclipse, I put out a little warning or so. One of my astrology teachers has always kind of said, be cautionary during eclipses. Don't do ceremony during eclipses. Don't do big celebrations. Just sort of, like go inward and reflect, do the inner reflections, spend the day inside, focus on self-care, etc. Right? So that's one of my mentors. And then I have other mentors who are in the sky astrology movement, and they are sky watchers, and they travel all over the world every time there's an eclipse, and they watch the eclipse, and they swear that it's not an issue, right, to watch eclipses. And there is all of this mythology surrounding eclipses. So when I posted that eclipse post, on Facebook, it's got like 500 plus likes. I don't know how many shares, thousands of shares, and hundreds of comments where people talk about, seeing the eclipse in 2017 and it being the most um, special event, the most majestic event. The energy of the eclipse was so beautiful and clarifying, and like, that they'll never regret having seen it. It was life-changing, etc. So there's so many comments like that in the comment section. And then likewise, there's other people in the comment section going, I don't know. I've heard eclipses aren't something that you want to interact with. Then there's some stories about people who've watched eclipses and their lives really changed. And I thought that we'd sort of dig into that because I actually think it's relevant during this eclipse. And I wasn't sure when I posted that or even when I was responding to the comments. In fact, what happened is because of that post, I've decided to really get into relationship about where I stand on this particular topic for this particular eclipse because I don't ever want to generate fear. And I don't think every eclipse is super monumental. I mean, they all have the potential to change our destiny. They are quite simply put cosmic edit points. So there are opportunities for, us to edit or renegotiate our own self-authoring. And let me re-say that. While it's an opportunity for us to renegotiate and re-self-author like a different narrative for ourselves, It's never through our own power with eclipses. Eclipses are very cosmic energy and they precipitate like cosmic level events. Um, and so we want to have reverence for the energy that comes in and not try and exert our will over them. And so while it's an edit point for us, it's meant for us to meet the energy and work with it versus for us to be willing things into an existence because it's an eclipse, right? So don't think like, oh, there's an eclipse coming, so I'll make this major change. Uh-uh. There's an eclipse coming. I'll stay conscious, I'll stay aware, I'll stay awake, and I'll meet whatever comes up with that same sense of consciousness and awareness. Okay. So it's not about, doing any kind of planetary magic or moon magic or ceremony to manifest something. It's not that kind of energy. You don't want to have that orientation to eclipses, especially not an eclipse. Like if you are in North America, that is so close to, like where you are so close to the path of totality. So having given that introduction, I over the past few days, I've been sitting with things. I've actually made some notes because I don't want to forget to hit on anything. And things were dropping in a way that eventually started to weave and tell a story. So I want to make sure that I hit on all of the points. So we've spoken now about the kind of energetic shifts eclipses signify. They're like the cosmic kind, the kind that we don't have any control over when just some random thing happens and it shifts our lives and we have to respond to it. They're like karmic or fated, right? Um, Understanding first what an eclipse is. So this morning, at like 3 in the morning here in EST, we had a lunar eclipse that took place in Libra, at 5 degrees Libra. And this is when the shadow of the earth it covers the moon. And this one was very faint. It wasn't like the whole moon was covered. I wouldn't say this was like the most powerful lunar eclipse, but it is a lead up and it is in Libra, and that is something to note. This powerful eclipse that I'm talking about is the April 8th solar eclipse that will be a total eclipse. And that kind of eclipse is when not the Earth shadow, but the moon moves in front of the path of the sun, and the disk of the moon completely covers the sun. And that is like a major eclipse when that happens. So let's understand like what the bodies are that we're working with. So the sun, what does the sun signify? The sun is like the source of life. It in um, some traditions it signifies God or the creator energy. For me, it like signifies consciousness, illumination, life force in general, right? Like where we get that substance of life force. Think about it. The sun is one of those things like you literally can't live without it. When it penetrates your skin, it creates an alchemical reaction that asks your body to convert certain minerals and vitamins that we really can't live without. Like, so there's this really integral piece, like there's no other planet in the solar system that is that consequential to who we are. It penetrates our and interacts with our atmosphere in these really important ways. And so there's this feeling that, the sun is animate and it is interacting in an intelligent way with the people here on Earth. Like it's got a symbiotic, synergistic relationship with us, right? And then the moon. I made a video last eclipse season when the eclipses happened in October that talked about the moon and this principle in quite a bit of detail. And so I'll briefly touch on it now, but if it's very interesting to you and you want to hear more about this principle, just make sure you find that moon video and I will try and remember to link it. So essentially, the moon is the archetype of the Great Mother, right? She is the receiver of the sun's light, the receptacle, and she catches all of the light, right, that comes from the solar system towards Earth, and she kind of like acts like a filter or and a refractor and a receptacle and a receiver, like a satellite in a sense, and not in the way I think that a lot of people hold the moon as some like artificial satellite. I don't think that at all. I actually think there is a divine purpose for the moon. But essentially, so she goes around the earth, and in her capacity as mother, my sense is that the moon is this body that pins the matrix in place, matrix mother. Right? She's a pattern generating machine. We can see every 28 days as she makes her way around the zodiac that there's this sense of a rhythm that she's creating, right? And we need this sense of rhythm, not only to like just survive, to know our lives, to understand that there's this like repetitive cyclical flow to life, but there's also this way that the moon sort of like mediates consciousness, right? Like think about the moon's function of, there's like the unconscious, the dark moon, and she wanes and she gets full and then she she waxes and then she gets full and then she wanes. And there's this kind of like this factor of mediating light and mediating consciousness. And she is mediating consciousness because that light is in direct relationship to the sun who represents consciousness. And so there's this kind of like coming to illumination and then dying off that happens every month, right? And one of the ways I really like to metaphorically talk about her is like, so as the function of mother, she pins the matrix in place, she pins our reality in place, our 3D reality in place. And a lot of us know that like our brain is more powerful than what we have access to, that we have access to like 10% of our brain. We can see a very tiny spectrum of color. We can pick up on a very tiny spectrum of form and shape. And my sense is that just like we would not like our own children to take in, harmful, dangerous things. We don't want them watching TV or TikTok, things that they shouldn't be seeing that's too old for them. My sense is that the moon really veils us from this from the outer solar system, from everything else that's happening out there, from all of the different planes, dimensions, timelines, like everything else that's going on in the real reality. Like life is bigger than, just what we can see on the material plane. It's weirder. It's odd. It's strange, right? There's so much more. Just take a second to really think into that, like feel into that. Like there's so much more than we could ever imagine. There's so many more dimensions, so many more timelines, potentially parallel universes going on. Like there's this function that the moon has to say, I'm going to keep the world you live in digestible for you. And I think that that's a good and bad thing. Like there are shadow qualities to that. Like we frequently see the archetype of the great mother as veiled, right? Um, there's there's the quality of like that helps us to focus on the karmic incarnation and the lessons we came here to embody, right? That shielding factor. So on the one hand, it's a good thing, and on the other hand, it sometimes keeps us in illusion or, relating to things unconsciously or in the subconscious that we shouldn't be relating to. I also think that she has this protective force that keeps out things that shouldn't be in here. So, what happens when there's an eclipse? Well, when there's an eclipse, there's an alignment of the sun and the moon blots out the consciousness of the sun. And some of the ancients thought that this was, in a way, opening like a dragon hole, and that, like, all of the sudden, the moon's function stopped working, that veiling protective function stopped working. And it opened the kind of like portal to the earth for all of these more, um, non-three-dimensional, non-earth organic beings to be here or energies to flow in. Do with that information what you will. I don't know if that's something that I believe as like a crystallized belief, but it is an interesting kind of phenomenon to sit with. It's an interesting inquiry to be in. Like, is that even true? Right? Again, like I said, I have many astrologer colleagues that go and watch every eclipse, swear it is always life-changing, always miraculous, always majestic. And of course, because they're astrologers, they track the influence and outcomes of those eclipses, and they say there's no necessarily like negative or nefarious thing that has happened. They haven't come home with entities on them and XYZ, and they're people who pay attention to it. I'm kind of giving you the lore, right? The esoteric sort of understanding of what could be happening. Now I'm going to take a look at my notes because I want to transition into talking some about this particular eclipse. The other thing with eclipses in general, and then we'll talk about this particular eclipse, is that for a long time, and I'm someone who really reveres ancient wisdom. I'm not a huge new ager. I mean, I don't mind bridging ancient wisdom to bring into where we're going, but I'm not a new ager. I definitely lean into like the wisdom of the ancients and that they had something brilliant to say, and that, like through the after the Cartesian split and materialism really came online, that there's been a lot of purging of really important wisdom that we needed, that we don't have anymore because of these purges. And so it's something that I tune into. I want to be responsible. And I think the ancients knew a lot of things, uh, you know, there's a lot that happens between heaven and earth that we don't really understand, right? And I think the ancients were far more tuned into that than us who just hang out on our devices. And so for the ancients, frequently eclipses would be moments of prophecy, harbingers of change, big planetary change. Um, and so I want to speak to two of those that I have tuned into since I posted that thing. I posted that post about the eclipse that got so much interaction. I've tuned into of two prophecies, and I'll tell you, I don't think I would have cared if they didn't come in the order they came in. And I'm going to tell you what these prophecies are, and then I'm very quickly going to ask you to forget about them. Okay? That's the that's the exact order that I want this to go in. So one of my colleagues posted about an old like a latter-day Sufi mystic, Ibn Arabi, right? And his orientation to the eclipses, and how, of course, Ibn Arabi had these four pillars of like turning inwards, like allowing himself to fast, to purify, to pray, etc. Um, and so I was like looking up more about like what the Sufi mystics thought. Much of astrology is derived, as we know, like the three wise men were from the Middle East. Babylon, of course, is the Middle East, the ziggurats. Much of the astrology that we base, mo base modern astrology on is from the Sufi mystics. So I'm like, what do they think? And so I happened through my Google search to wind up on um, this page that talks about signs of the end times, right? And that the Muslims believe that the end times and that the Messiah and the Christ will come back when there is a lunar eclipse on the 13th day of Ramadan and a solar eclipse on the 27th day of Ramadan. And I'm like, that's really interesting. because we're having a lunar eclipse on the 15th day of Ramadan and the 29th day of Ramadan. And how often is there even a lunar eclipse during Ramadan? Like this feels, wow, like mathematically, it's not even common for us to have, for Ramadan to happen during eclipse season, let alone to have this like sign of the end times happening um, while with those few days apart. Like, I mean, this is just 2 days difference. And, you never know, like the calculations that were made hundreds of years ago may not have accounted for drift or clock change, or do you know what I mean? And so I'm like, this is really interesting. The chances are so minimal that we'd be having eclipses in Ramadan on these particular days, in this particular order, lunar eclipse and solar eclipse. So it's like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what that means. And then I started to hear about the prophecy of the red heifer. And I heard about it through one of the astrology accounts that I follow on YouTube. I think they're fabulous. They're very high quality astrology videos, and I will link this video. It's like a 10-minute video. He does this thing called the World Report, and so he does a lot of mundane astrology reporting. So astrologically comparing events to what the current astrology is. And it's just a really fascinating, he's great. Anyways, can't recommend this station enough or this channel enough. But anyways, he gets on and he says, I wasn't going to report on this, but since CNN and the mainstream media are reporting on this, I will go ahead and report on this. And so he starts to talk about this red heifer prophecy. And, if you know anything about what is going on or like the religious aspect of what is happening in Israel, Palestine, part of it is from a religious perspective. So this is not like geopolitics. This is like the background driving religious beliefs that some of the kind of like more extreme people believe, right? Um, they have this prophecy that the third temple will be built when there is this ritual of the red heifer. And so they need to find a red cow. And it's not just any cow, it is a red cow where every single hair on the red cow's body is red. And then they burn this cow at Passover, right? And then after the burning, and then they mix that with water and they invite the people to um, partake in some way, participate in some way with the water and the ash. And then this is like the signification that the third temple is going to be built. And this is really what a lot of the evangelical Christians and some of the more, I don't even know the name for it, for the Jewish apocalyptic or end times Jewish people believe, who want to precipitate that time of the third temple, right? Which is under Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so lo and behold, it turns out that there are these red heifers that a man in Texas in 2022 sent 5 red heifers over to Israel to be held on a kibbutz, and that potentially this ceremony is going to take place just after this eclipse during Passover this year. And Passover is April 20th. The eclipse is April 8th. Okay. And what's really interesting is the path. If you map the 2017 eclipse in America on, it kind of came through the Pacific Northwest down through the South, through Texas. If you map that on to this eclipse, which is going to come up from Texas and go through the Northeast this time, the place where they cross is Texas. And that is exactly where this farm is located that sent these red heifers to Israel. And to make this further strange and kind of like wrap this Islamic kind of like end times thing into it. The one of the leaders of Hamas was um, on a show talking about the fact, I don't know if it was before or after the attack. You can watch this little 10-minute video, but like he was on a show talking about the fact that, they need to prevent this red heifer ritual from taking place because it's going to precipitate the fall of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And if I were somebody who is looking at those signs happening, and I also saw maybe potentially that my own books talk about eclipses during Ramadan that are very close to the days that these eclipses are going to happen during Ramadan, I might be a little bit, if I were mm, religiously superstitious, or I don't know what that word was, if I was heavily invested in these books and their signs and portents being true, I might actually believe that I needed to stop this ritual from taking place. So, why did I say, I'm sorry, this is not just your run-of-the-mill like astrology interpretation video, is it? It's getting heavy, right? But I really want to talk about this because we're going to get into the interpretation now and you're going to understand why this is important. So, why did I say to forget about this? Well, there's something odd to me about the fact that the news, the mainstream media is now presenting this, right? And anytime, let's say, occult forces or, like when, for me personally, and you, of course, can believe whatever you want, when I start to see people purposely playing out prophecy, right? Like the fact that some gentleman in Texas knows that there's this prophecy, and so he sends 5 different cows or heifers, red heifers over to the Middle East. To me, that feels like man's will. That doesn't feel like, on the equinox, a red heifer emerged on the Mount of Olives at sunrise and, like walked, like majestically presented itself, which that to me feels much more godlike, right? So whenever I see these things that feel much more precipitated by humans, like the will of humans making these things happen versus like they're organically moving, I tend to think there's some like occult thing happening here. Like they're going to be doing like some high magic, like if this actually takes place, they're going to be doing some like high magic ritual, right? This like sect of people who would be participating in this red heifer ceremony, right? It's kind of like, like if the Mormons here, or like, I don't think that this is mainstream Israeli society necessarily. I think this is like some sect, right, inside of Israeli society who's, you know, deeply into the religious part, right? I want to speak carefully because I know how politically charged and all of this stuff is. But I'm thinking that, the more we give our attention to these rituals, to these end time signs, to these prophecies, the more power we're giving them, right? And this is why I'm saying I want you to quickly forget this. Like if you start seeing this on the news or they start amping up stuff about this, I actually think, when we start to get worried or, like when we allow, the sensationalism to like run through us or, whether we're worried or excited or whatever the feeling is, whatever kind of loosh our body is excreting is being harvested in a sense or like, ushered towards that ceremony and it gives it more power. It gives it more of a chance of working all of this high magic. It's like when they turn all our eyes to like coronations of kings and queens or like any kind of thing that they try to usher the world into seeing. It's like we're being asked to farm out our attention for the purpose of lending more energy and more magic to that thing, right? And so, um, let me check my notes here. Let's say, for instance, I know this is heavy, but just stick with me. Let's say that this is all true and we're in some kind of like weird spiritual holy war. I think a lot of people I've talked to recently have said that they like sense this sort of like spiritual battle taking place for good and for light, for embodiment and disembodiment, for um for like first order beings and second order beings. So like let's say that is all playing out. Let's talk about what we mean by first order beings, second order beings, and things like that, just so we can define our terms a little bit. So a zero order being is God. It's source itself, right? So we as human beings are not first order beings or zero order beings. Then we have first order human beings, which is us. It's us with the imprint of God on us. It's us with a soul, right? It is us connected to our divine spark. And then we kind of have these second order beings, which is kind of like a husk of a human being without the imprint of God on them. These are beings run entirely on like thought forms, egregor, that, they kind of take on this nihilistic or narcissistic, kind of self-destructive, they're always reiterating talking points and it almost seems like they're working on behalf of whatever agenda or ritualistic agenda is trying to play out on the earth. Um, and so it's like these are people who live from the shadow. And of course, because we are on this 3D earth plane, this teaching place, we have a variety of first and second order beings here, right? And um, essentially, like if we want to be a first order being, it's not hard, like it's not like we can't, if we realize, oh, I've kind of been a second order being, what we do is we tap in with first order emotions, emotions that stem from God, true love, unconditional love, compassion, awareness, knowledge, abstaining from the love of money. And people who are in second order kind of like in touch with egregor, where the imprint of God isn't safely protecting them, let's say, they kind of operate more from lust, hatred, jealousy, fear, contempt, greed, which stem from, deep unfulfillment because of that separation, because we're in this material plane that feels very separated from God-like qualities. These unfulfilled feeling states stem from the void where the heart should be, right? It doesn't mean that we never feel jealousy, fear, greed, envy, all of those things. If we do feel them, we feel them consciously. We have the feeling, we digest that, we compost it, and we move forward because we are human. Sometimes those feelings are going to come up. It's not a suggestion of bypassing them. It's more that like we're not consciously running those feelings, or sorry, unconsciously running those feelings in the background, creating inner infrastructure that props up those feelings and like keeps them running in this sort of like nonstop background level that sort of like gives off this, yeah, this kind of like second order loosh, right? And justifies these feelings and locks them in place and keeps us in that more unconscious egregor state. We want to keep the flame of the Immaculate Sacred Heart lit, right? We want that deep connection between God. And I want to explain why I'm bringing all of this piece in about God and, husks. And these words sound crazy, right? But like essentially, Aries, right? Aries is the sign of the divine spark. I mean, if we look at the zodiac chart, we see Pisces as the void, the liminal all, the waters we travel through this world into, the waters we come out of. And there's this moment right when we pass the threshold between Pisces and Aries that it's a moment of separation, and we are embedded in that moment with this divine spark to tend and care for. It is the spark of I am, and it is for us now to be the, quote unquote parents to guide and usher through this incarnation. And the quality of that spark is only as good as how well we tend it. And of course, that spark can get damaged through different traumas, different belief systems, different kinds of conditionings. When the soul detaches from the body, so when we've had like those events that create soul loss, when we invest our truth or think that we're investing our truth too heavily into like mob mentality or mass psychosis or, like the prevailing narratives of the day, all of those things take us away from this immaculate sacred heart or having our soul being firmly planted in our bodies. And, you know, the Libra aspect of this eclipse is essentially like relationship with other. And so, there is that like, what is our relationship with life? What is our relationship with God? What are is the quality of our intimate relationships, and how are we showing up in those partnerships and those relationships? Are we showing up as a first order being or a second order being? Are we fully present when we're showing up? And so there's a lot of these qualities that are really, really important. And, you know, I had said I'd make a video about the orientation to this eclipse. And for me, looking at all of the different mm, prophecies, right? Like, there's a lot of times I think about prophecy and I'm like, this is nonsense. But this time, given that this last eclipse season back in October happened right, like almost conjunct Israel's ascendant, chart ascendant for the country, and that so many placements in Bibi Netanyahu's chart were in the chart of that eclipse. It was like insane how many there were. It feels like we're in this fated time and on this fated trajectory, right? And so I don't think that it is poor or bad wisdom at all to say to and we happen to be sort of like in the Easter portal, and we know in Easter there's Lent and then Passover is coming. It just doesn't seem like bad wisdom at all to say, what I would be doing during this eclipse season is really coming home to that I am principle, really tending the sacred flame of my heart, really stoking the connection between me and whatever you want to define as God. In fact, I'll give you my definition of God, just so we know exactly what we're talking about. God as the original seed of consciousness from which all existence and individual being emerged, an infinite supply of true emotional energy to which humans are energetically connected to and have access to. And when I say true, I mean that first order being, that emotional energy of love and truth and awareness. And it is God who established the duat. It is God who created this dualism, this teaching environment here. And he did that from the fractalization of his own oneness or his own monadic self. He separated himself from the void. And so we now live in a paradigm of positive and negative spaces, right? And it's up to us to navigate those spaces. And those create the two polarities of loosh. And I know some people might be like, what is loosh? A loosh is essentially this idea that um, the energy we generate is used for good or for ill, right? So if we were to put a lot of focus during the eclipse, like I said, on, our own internal selves, on our soul, on the quality of our connection with God, um, you know, potentially connecting with the light within, with the love within, with the immaculate sacred heart, and not giving that frenetic, disembodied, fear-based attention to some like a apocalyptic prophecy, right? We are not feeding the energy of that. And Lush is essentially like the energy we give off. So we either create positive Lush that comes out in love and it affects the planet in positive ways, or we create negative niche that then can be siloed into these particular projects. That energy can somehow be used. And this is very supernatural, very occult, this very esoteric thing that I'm talking about. You don't have to understand it other than, just sort of understanding that our feeling states, our emotional states do contribute to the overall trajectory of the collective, right? And so, as long as we're tending to ourselves and our own evolutionary path and the quality of our connection to source and to ourselves, then, we are on a first order kind of path. Right. And when we get too hyper focused on the external and we allow every wave to pull us off the seat of our soul, in what's interesting is in Sky Dancer and in the context of the Venus cycle, we are in the root chakra. And so we are talking about the theme of the throne. Like, where is our throne? Where is our seat of power? Where do we ground? How do we ground? What does it feel like to sit in our seat of power and kind of like connect the soul all the way down into the root and hold all pieces of soul in the field of the body and keep them kind of like encased, and so they're not necessarily subjected to all of the chaos, or not that they're not subjected to the chaos, that as the chaos comes in, they are able to stay embodied and in kind of like this and in connection, let's say, during the waves of chaos. And certainly I think, there are some chart factors here that make me think that more chaos is on the way. And I don't think though, and you will hear me say that there are some parts of me that are excited about potentially where we're going, especially if we can sort of like hold that inner pull of connection to the essence of who we are and connection to God and consciousness, right? Um, we've got the eclipse conjunct Chiron. Um, Chiron, it's to the minute. And, there's so many dimensions of Chiron that we can think about. For one, just like let's tie up the Loosh perspective. So for one, Chiron is related to the scapegoat archetype, and that is a particular paradigm that projects blame, sin. It persecutes. It's a persecutory energy that pins sin onto a particular person or group. And I think it is a particular tool or mechanism of Loosh. Like it's used to help create Loosh. Like look at all the bad things that person's done. Let's generate lots of rage and persecutory energy and uh, project it onto them. And so I almost feel like, sometimes the scapegoat is used in this kind of cycle of perpetuating disembodiment, right? Instead of looking at ourselves and looking at, where we have that same pattern inside of us, we want to project it out onto the other and stay angry and stay disembodied, right? So that's one fractal of Chiron. And of course, how the scapegoat lives in us and a psychic thing is a whole nother personal fractal. Chiron is kind of like the wounded healer, right? Like how the wounded people move us into the realms of healing. Yes, that as well. The other thing Chiron is he is a bridge, and I'm going to focus on this symbolism a little bit because there's another resonance with bridges in this eclipse. And I think, that symbolism is really important. So, um, Chiron, in essence, is that function of being able to meet the wounded parts of us. It's not about fixing or curing or, having power over our wounds, beating them into submission so they don't bother us anymore. Chiron's invitation is like, meet this part of yourself, meet your sacred wound, get inside of it, turn it inside out, be in relationship with it, love it, meet it. What is your quality or capacity to be able to do that? And we talked about that a little bit in the first order being thing, in the sense that it's not that we never feel our wounds, feel bad, feel jealousy, feel hurt, feel trauma. It's that we have the capacity to be in conscious awareness, conscious relationship with them, right? So that's an important Chiron piece. Chiron's father was Saturn. Um, and Saturn is, of course, a very logical, patriarchal god, representative of the masculine. And Chiron's mother was an ocean nymph. And, that ties some of his genealogy back to the primordial ocean or the prima materia, like the cosmic egg, the primordial um, primal, first principled part of life, the oldest thing. He is part man, Saturn, logic, part animal, because he's a centaur, right? Um, which is his connection to the primordial, to the mm, animal body, right? To our erotic nature, to chaos. And so he himself, in and of his body, is a bridge, right? Between that primal, erotic, animalistic part of the human and the more logical, civilized, right? Patriarchal, structured part of who we are. It's also said that he's the rainbow bridge in the sense that Saturn is the last visible planet in the sky. He's the last visible planet to the naked eye. Um, and he makes the bridge between the personal and social planets and the transpersonal planets because his orbit is out between Saturn and Uranus. It's thought that Chiron is a captured comet, like a comet that flew into our solar system and was captured by the orbits, the density or the gravity of the orbits between Saturn and Uranus. And Saturn or Uranus is the first of the transpersonal planets. And so it's said that Chiron is sort of this bridge between the known and the unknown, or the personal and the transpersonal. And then staying with that exact motif, I think this is also really interesting. In the background, in the same part of the sky, we have a comet coming through, and that comet is called Pons Brooks. So you'll be able to see this comet. I don't know if you'll be able to see it with the naked eye, but it's definitely visible through, you know, um, telescopes and whatnot. It's a beautiful comet. It's running through Aries, through Taurus. It'll be, I think, conjunct Jupiter at some part of this eclipse season. But when the meaning of something isn't immediately obvious, astrologers start looking at etymology. So I hear this wild card comet that's going to be active um, between the eclipses is coming in, and I'm like, well, okay, Pons Brooks, what's the etymology of Pons? And so I look that up and I'm like, oh, Pons is the etymology is a bridge, like in Welsh and um Old English and stuff like that. A Pons is a bridge. We just said Chiron was a bridge. That's interesting. There's a double resonance, which generally strengthens a theme. And Brooks is here. And what's interesting is that I don't know if a lot of you know this, but the signs are no longer in alignment with the constellations in the sky. So we may have the sun and Aries, but in the background, it's still in the constellation of the fish. And we call the area of Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, the celestial sea. And Pisces in general is kind of like the celestial river, that primordial river, that like source of the void. And the Pisces symbolism is so interesting. It's like these two backward commas, right? And they have a bridge or a line going through them. And, you could make it look like the Taurus, that ever flowing sense of like the void coming in and coming out, the everlasting life, the celestial river, or, that bridge can be thought of as the celestial river. But when we mention bridge in this context, I want to say one more thing. The other thing is the word ponds, not brooks, but the ponds part is part of our brain that attaches the older cerebellum, or the like animal part of our brain, to the more modern part of our brain. It's an actual body part, the pons. It's part of the brain structure. And so I'm thinking, oh, so like, are we going to end up getting more access to knowledge? Like, is that bridge going to light up with some new psychic or capacity or some psychic ability? Who knows? Um, and I often think when I hear the symbolism of bridge, especially related to eclipses, you think of wormhole. You think of like the ability to skip a step. Like there's going to be a cosmic opportunity to potentially skip evolutionary steps here, or like we're just going to make some kind of um, big jump. Maybe there's a split in the timeline. It's different for everybody. What I want you to do is feel into what's true for you, and really keep bringing your energy back to the quality of your relationships, and the quality of your relationship with that God spark, that divine spark within you, that Aries spark. It's so important. I don't think the symbolism could be any more clear. And that we are, like in this bridge moment of like where we're moving somewhere. um we're moving into a new paradigm. We can't not be. The way the world is right now is literally not working. And this eclipse, its two malefics are together in the sign of the void. We've got so that's Saturn and Mars together. Pisces, the sign of the void. So that's like either inspired action and grounding in some area to move forward, or it's like a signature of more chaos. It's kind of like can go either way. Um, Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that I've said everything that I want to say. And then and 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 that it is the two malefics together. And malefics meaning like you know, portents of like negative things. Mars is the planet of war, Saturn is the planet of like the patriarch. Is there going to be, is the patriarch like in this case like the United States, or that that ruling body of the UN as like the patriarch of the world, is it going to be taken into a deeper war, or are we going to finally put the brakes on? I mean, that's kind of the question. Like, where is humanity headed in that sense? But that's what those two archetypes mean. And they are sitting really at the fount of the void. And so it's almost as if anything's possible, right? Pisces is very diffuse and um, kind of general and, yeah, voidish in particular. And then we have that Taurus Jupiter eclipse, right? And Taurus speaks to us about our values. It's definitely can talk to us about like financial systems, our actual resources, money wise, the values we have about ourselves, how we hold ourselves in the world, um, our potential for abundance, havingness, all of that. Jupiter is connected to faith and spirituality for sure. And then he's conjunct Uranus, who is known for his shocks and surprises and really strong liberatory energy. And so there's this question around like, if my values are around liberation and there's more of a squeeze on freedom, are we going to see an expansion and an upwelling of of liberatory movements, right? Because we've also got Pisces in Aquarius, and that's where not Pisces and Aquarius, Pluto in Aquarius. That's also, Pluto was in Aquarius during like the French Revolution and all of those revolutions during the European war, or the 1700s, right? And even when the American Revolution happened. So there's lots on the table. So given that there's so much on the table, for me, I am really feeling into whether or not I'm actually going to go outside during this eclipse or if I am going to just kind of keep my head down, stay inside, be very reverent. I'm leaning towards the latter just because now that I've actually looked into all the chart factors, it just feels like good wisdom to, connect with myself. I'm not even going to connect with any guides to kind of like, I don't have guides actually, but like I guess my point is I wouldn't connect with guides. The only guide I have is this living source of love that emanates from the center of the earth and pulsates from the center of the cosmos. That is the field itself and the intelligence of what the field can tell me, right? That is my one and only quote unquote guide. But like I'm really tuning into myself and like the deeper thing for me, my connection to source, um, to God, the one that I know is very strong, and doing maybe even some protection rituals and yeah, kind of closing up shop. And I might watch the eclipse. They'll live stream it. I might watch it later. I'm definitely not going to be doing any kind of ceremony or divination during the eclipse. Just feels to me like that's good wisdom. But at the end of the day, like I said, I know a lot of people who watch eclipses all the time, and it is not an issue. So please don't feel like um, my personal choice should be your personal choice. My recommendation is that you really feel into the energy for yourself. Like just feel into it, especially like closer to the day. We're talking about April 8th, so closer to the day. All right, so what I'll do is I'll link the video for the eclipse that I made last time that talks about that function of the moon. It goes into the moon more deeply and like how the moon creates this mother-like veiling function for the planet and how it mediates how much light is here. We are moving through the photon belt, and so there is more light on the planet. What happens when there's more light on the planet is what we attract more shadow, right? The shadows become starker, they become taller, bigger. Um, and so the fact that we feel the duality between those two more strongly than usual is no surprise. I will link that report, that eclipse report about the prophecies. It just talks about the red heifer. It doesn't have the Muslim prophecy about the Ramadan on the 13th and 27th day. And we're not having an eclipse on the 13th and 27th day of Ramadan, just to be clear. We're having one on the 15th and 29th. My point is, it's so rare that we have eclipses at all during Ramadan or that those would happen within 2 days of each other. I'm just curious if, because of like a time drift in doing those calculations, those predictions were made in like 500 or 600 AD. Like, could there have been, do you know what I'm saying? I don't know. Um, yeah. And then if you guys have any questions or comments, I would love to hear your reflections. It would just be so interesting to know what your plans are, what your experiences have been. Like, is there a conversation we've been having? Have you heard other prophecies? Like, this stuff is super interesting to me. It's going to be a powerful eclipse, no doubt. I think it's going to be a paradigm changing eclipse. Focus in on where the bridge points in your life are, like where is one thing ending and another thing beginning. And that's really beautiful. Like, I think that there is going to be a lot of beauty and opportunity that opens up for people. Eclipses are not always bad. Change is not always bad. I don't want to inject fear. If you go and look at that Facebook post, you will see that so many people had beautiful experiences with the last eclipse, that this is not about fear at all. It's about awareness. It's about being conscious and approaching some of these larger energies that are bigger than we are with reverence and consciousness. Okay. All right. Thanks so much.